From gameplay features to platforms, release, multiplayer, and factions, the developers of Dune Spice Wars have revealed a lot in today's Ask Me Anything, so let's unpack it. First and foremost, they were asked what current game is most similar in gameplay in terms of Dune Spice Wars. They replied by saying that Dune Spice Wars is sort of a mixture between Northguard, one of their existing titles, and Stellaris, the 4X space strategy game that came out of Paradox Studios in terms of both depth and complexity. They go on to say that there are light story elements in the game, but no overall big narrative arc. There are 3 victory conditions for now as well. We'll unpack that a little bit more towards the end of this video, but I've got more to discuss about the nature of Dune Spice Wars, so let's keep unpacking these answers. Next up, how much, if this game, would be like Northguard to you? Northguard is an RTS with hints of a 4X. Dune Spice Wars is a 4X with hints of real-time strategy. They build on this a little bit more by being quizzed on the fact that real-time strategy lovers are mostly old people by now. Will they take that into consideration when considering players' reflexes? Extremely complex economic management. Bit of an oddball question, but they go on to say that Dune Spice Wars is not a fast-paced real-time strategy game. They presented it as a 4X, think Civilization 6 or Humankind, traditionally turn-based titles, of course. But Dune Spice Wars will have real-time strategy mechanics, but we'll be able to pause the game, carefully plan our reactions to different events and strategies to overcome the other factions, our opponents. Essentially what they're trying to say here is that while this game will operate in real time, like Age of Empires, for example, it will be slower and have more 4X elements in it. And you'll see that in the background where I have some Dune Spice Wars gameplay and some clips from the trailer as well later in this, just to highlight what the game actually looks like while we unpack these answers. Speaking of which, this one is a big one and kind of summarizes everything that I've already said in a really nice way. What will make this unique outside of just being 4X Dune themed, right? So not only are we unpacking the fact that it's a 4X game, but actually what's going to make this unique other than the theming bonus? Something I've been very interested in myself as somewhat of a fan of Dune, but really realistically, and as regular viewers of my channel will know, much more interested in the strategy game, the actual mechanics of it itself. They go on to say that a lot of the theming aspects that make Dune unique as a world are translated into gameplay systems. For example, the whole exploration system in this game, in this wonderful, hopefully 4X game, is specific to Dune. Units have a supply stat that measures how long they can survive in the desert. Think of this as their attrition, their supply, effectively. You can also improve it with techs and buildings. Wind strength in the world as well of each region makes traveling harder or more easy depending on where you are. Deep deserts act like seas that we can't cross until we have techs to do so. And of course, giant sandworms. They also go on to say that there are political and spying espionage elements. You can win by assassinating other leaders if you think you can pull it off. Amazing. One of them, another developer goes on to say that we're doing what we've always done with Shiro Games, innovating what already exists. It's a 4X game with RTS elements, including specifically the combat, but they're also trying to make it a chill experience with peaks of pleasure. I love it. Let's move on to talk about platform release, multiplayer, and mods, the kind of base of the game built on top. So, are there plans to bring Spice Wars to consoles? Nice question. They say, hey, hard to tell, but we did port our other game, Northguard, on New South Wales, Xbox, and PlayStation, so maybe someday. Interesting to note, sounds like we're going to be stuck with, not a problem for me, a PC release to begin with. Of course, they do actually also go on to mention the Steam Deck. They have a kit, but they're not currently developing or releasing a version for it, just in case you happen to be lucky enough to have one of those. Will it be moddable, is the next question. Unfortunately, they go on to say, no, not at launch, but it's something that they are discussing. We know that this type of game, they say, and the modding scene can be very beneficial for its overall lifespan, so we're keeping that in mind for, quote, future development of Spice Wars. Sounds like we're not going to get any modding tools, at least when it releases in early access. We'll touch a little bit more on that later in the video as well. Next up, I want to talk a little bit about the factions and the gameplay elements that will actually be brought from the Dune world in, because I know some of you will be curious about that. We've seen your faction can be led by the Duke or Baron. Someone asks, what other characters will be in the game? They go on to say that a few of them, and many other important ones, are counselors in the game. They are characters you choose along with your faction who bring specific abilities. Think of them kind of like governors. So not all characters will be playable, but they will have other roles within the game. Another person asks, will the game feature this house as a playable faction? Again, they say, we haven't announced all of the factions, just a couple. Let's just say there will be both houses and non-house factions in the future. Good to note. Also note that they talk about in the future, because there's a lot of discussion in the AMA about microtransactions and DLC and whether they're developing it or not. Again, I'll touch on that a little bit later, but just quickly to finish off the factions and gameplay section here, one more thing that I wanted to note, will there be any reoccurring characters from the books? Congratulations on the release. They go on to say, thanks, and yes, most of the main characters from book 1 will make an appearance, and most of those who won't now will do so in, again, future content. Very interesting. That's all the AMA questions I'm going to put on screen. At the end of this video here, I'm just going to touch on that DLC, new content release and early access window, because many of you may be wondering, what content will it have, when can I get it, and how? Dune Spice Wars is currently scheduled to release on early access on Steam this year. And from what I was reading and from what they were hinting at in Ask Me Anything, it sounds like, and in fact they actually made a specific point of mentioning this, it will probably be sooner than you think. Now, of course, it's likely their job to build hype, and I'm well aware of that, but to be honest, I'm happy to fall victim to it if it means that I can get early access to this game sooner than we might think. It's a huge release calendar coming up in the second quarter of this year, with other titles from publishers like Hooded Horse as well, loads of strategy games coming out. The other thing that I wanted to cover that I've hinted at already is how will future content be released? Now, one thing that you may be very curious about that they made specific point of mentioning is that there will be no microtransactions for Dune Spice Wars. So, if you like to pay a little bit of money for a little bit of content, you won't have that option. They do go on to say, of course, that they are focusing on the main release at the moment. DLC is not a consideration for them right now. DLC, of course, standing for downloadable content. But then also in those answers earlier, they make point of mentioning future content, future development. Obviously, we should expect Dune Spice Wars to receive DLC. I mean, how weird would it be for a game to release in 2022 and not receive future content updates? I'm not a fool. I fully expect that to play out. It sounds like they're going to take a careful and balanced approach to it, not favoring smaller releases, but rather larger expansion packs. Personally, I prefer that. But also, if we reflect on Civilization 6's New Frontier Pass, that was quite an interesting way of introducing new content. And maybe developers could look at that model in future as well. Either way, that's all I'm going to cover from the AMA. If you'd like to check it out, it was on Reddit, as you probably have already gathered. You can go through and read all of their answers. There are a few other interesting ones, but I thought I would highlight the really key pieces of information to answer some commonly asked questions. Thank you very much for joining me. I didn't introduce myself at the start, but I'm JumboPixel. You probably know that already. If you're not already subscribed, I'd super appreciate it. I plan to cover Dune Spice Wars and all of the other wonderful 4X and, I guess, real-time strategy games that are coming out this year. We've got a huge roster ahead of us, and I'm very much looking forward to it. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you in the next one.